So I'm Jim Winship, longtime social work educator, and I do training around case management, and currently I'm working with the Central Territory of the Salvation Army on their caseworker certification program, which rolled out in the Central Territory in early 2019. This is a topic I'm really interested in, and I think it really comes from the work that I've done with homeless families and realizing that especially when it relates to housing, that getting housing sometimes is easier than holding on to housing. So we'll look at the issue of reaching goals and then why it's difficult for people sometimes to hold on to that, and some strategies that could follow. And as Rachel said, I'm going to stop this or pause it several times just to get your questions and comments, and then we'll do that again at the end of the session. So hold on, I am having trouble with my PowerPoint, which never happens, but it seems to be happening now. Okay, so attaining goals may be easier than maintaining, and the question, why is that so? And I think some of the answer is that often there is a lot of energy and anxiety into getting a goal. I'll talk about very specifically what those are and the ones that are most, I think, relevant to the work that you do. And then when people get that, there's a tendency to relax. I've reached that goal, and in many cases, the relaxing is not a good thing. So an analogy, and this is one that I think all of us can probably relate to, or almost all, is that thing about losing weight. To lose those 10 pounds in a week or in 3 months or whenever, and you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief that you've lost those 10 pounds. And then, of course, it's very easy for them to come back. And it's easier for them to come back than to lose them in the first place. And I think that whole process is applicable in many cases. Now, when we look at the most common goals, and this is from Pathway of Hope, this I think is from the Central Territory, but I think this is pretty representative of the Eastern, the Western Territories as well, that the 4 most common goals are income, economic or financial stability, housing, employment, and adult education, like getting a GED, HSED. And I put under there the thing from Sesame Street. One of these goals is not like the other. And I think that that's very much the case, right? Look at those, and maybe the jingle from Sesame Street will be going through your head. And it's this, that, getting a GED, getting an HSED, or, in the cases of what we've gone through, getting a degree, getting an associate or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. When you've got that, you've got it, and they're never going to take it away from you. But the other 3 are ones that the goal achievement is by no means permanent. So I think that when we think about reaching goals, I just want to make a comment. It's not this workshop. This is not a workshop on setting goals, but setting goals that are realistic, that are achievable, the right time frame. It's really important. I think too often people will set goals that are almost like castles in the air. And the things that would be wonderful to have, but really aren't, it's not that realistic to get it, at least at this point in time. And so being able to help clients set SMART goals, that are specific and measurable and achievable and realistic and in a good time frame is really important in order for them to be able to achieve the goals. But so let's talk a little bit about why it's hard to reach the goals and then to hold on to goals. So in working toward achieving goals, I think it's really important for clients to focus on what's the most important thing. There are times in which more than one thing needs to be worked on at a time. Things are kind of interrelated, but the question is, what's most important? What is crucial to the client's own shorter or long-term well-being, but also what's the thing that the client is most willing to invest time and energy? Because we all know that when a goal is important to people, then they're more likely to really commit to them. When they think that, yeah, this is something I need to do, there is less commitment on that. Also, not being too optimistic about the future. One thing that's really interesting about optimists and pessimists, okay, and this again is not this presentation, okay, that optimists tend to enjoy life more. My wife, who says I'm an optimist, says that I say the weather's perfect far too often, right, from her point of view, but a way of seeing the glass as half full rather than half empty. However, pessimists make better decisions than optimists do. And the reason for that is that pessimists are not too optimistic about the future. They're much less likely to say everything will all work out. They may be more likely to view all the negatives about the future than the optimists, but they make better decisions. The research is really clear on that. And I think as you work with clients on goals like getting housing, or really getting financially secure for the first time in a while, just a reminder that the road is rough. It's tough. It's tough in America right now for families, for people who don't have a lot of education and a lot of resources. It's the reality that we live in. Goals are achievable, but the road is rough, and I really like this graphic because it illustrates that. And in working towards achieving goals, preparing for unanticipated events, that life happens. We'll talk about this again when we get to the maintenance, to holding on to goals, because life happening, a crisis, family crisis, health, money-related accidents, all of those things can have an impact. And so people need to be thinking about that. We need to be helping them think about that, saying about what happens when, what happens if. And if we do that, then I think the goal achievement itself is more likely to happen. So I want to stop at this point. When we just talked about a little bit about the difficulty in achieving goals, and see if anyone has any questions or comments before we really go on to how to hold on to goal achievement.
It does not look like we have anything right now.
Okay, so let's just let's look at those three goal areas. And what I'm going to kind of do is there are some points that are I think applicable to all three, and there are some of those that are more applicable to just one of the others. But the idea that when we think about trying to reach goals, that getting there is only half the battle, right? People have gotten housing. that's great, but that you're really only halfway there, because the goal really should be is getting housing and holding on to housing, getting and maintaining. And that's a matter of just reframing the whole issue of goal achievement. And I think that when people think that way, that they're a little less likely to do that relaxing once they get in. And here's another starting point, and this is referencing the stages of change model. Now, I think most of you are familiar with the stages of change. James Prochaska, which he developed for use with alcohol and drug work, and then has been applied to a number of other places. And this is the graphic from the stages of change that I like best, because the stages of change is not presented as a linear process. It's often presented as a circle, and then people can redo the circle. But what I like about this is that as people move from pre-contemplation to contemplation, from preparation to action to maintenance, that often there are loops in there, and that one will reach that goal, you're in maintenance, and then something goes wrong, and you have to keep going in order to do that, and the whole thing may loop back again. And what they say in the stages of change is that that slipping up, going back to an earlier stage, is all part of the process. This is from one of Prochaska's books, in which he said, maintenance is not a static stage in which you hold the line. Rather, it's another busy, active time in which you learn new coping strategies. So it's not a time to relax. And it's not a time to just say, okay, I've got that. How do I hold on to it? Because holding on is, I'm still struggling. I've been thinking about what's the best wording to talk about that. You know, when you're holding on, you're not moving in any direction, right? You're just trying to stay. You think of the old thing of the Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, trying to hold back the ocean, the water that's coming in. And really what happens is when you're in maintenance, it's really more like, what are all the things that can be doing that at the very least keep you in having held on to what you've achieved. And so I think that what's necessary in that maintenance stage is to develop the plans and supports and habits that maintain goal achievement. And that's what I want to talk with you about for a while: plans and supports and habits. And to give you some examples of that. Developing the plans, anticipating some difficulties. Again, going back to the fact that that one really needs to be pessimistic, and one really needs to help the people you're working with to look at what are all the things that could get in the way of you're getting behind on paying your bills and paying the landlord. What are all the things that could get in the way of you're getting in trouble with creditors again and having collection agencies call? What are all the things that could get in the way of you're losing your housing? And I think when you start to develop that list, is that then you can go forward, because because things happen. I also really like this this graphic that shows the sign for a nuclear power plant and a spider farm, and then a scene from an old science fiction movie with a 14-foot tall spider coming down there. But difficulties need to be anticipated. What are the things that can go wrong? They may not go wrong, but at least so people are ready for those. And I really like the idea of contingency plans. Now, this is a contingency plan from the manufacturing world, but it's a really good model to use, just the kind of thing of 2 columns. And the first column is what could go wrong, and the second plan is contingency. If that happens, then what are you going to do? I think that's something that's very applicable. I think it's also important for people to identify and recognize the triggers, the kinds of behaviors or signs that things are going south. Now, some of this, I think both in terms of identifying things that can go wrong and the triggers, really borrowing from the substance abuse treatment world, in which when someone is trying to get sober, get straight, to give up alcohol and drugs, and they're in a treatment program or an outpatient program, that they spend almost as much time with people who are in the process of not using as what do you do to keep sobriety? What do you do to keep straight? What do you do in the first 3 weeks? What do you do in the 3 to 6 week period? What about that 3 month to 6 month period? Because that can be dangerous. So they're really just kind of asking people to go through individually or in a group to think about everything that can go wrong and what can be done, and then also to identify and recognize the triggers. You know, those are indicators and warning signs that you might be doing something that could jeopardize goal achievement. I really like this acronym, the emotions HALT, when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I think that for all of us, you know, when we get in that stage, it's likely that our behaviors may not be as healthy and as goal-directed or otherwise. You know, I would tell my social work students, you know, that when you get really down, you know, that that binging on Ben and Jerry's is better than binging on Jack Daniels. But I know that I'm more likely to want to overeat when I'm really not only hungry but angry, lonely, tired. And those are the kinds of times when people can do binge shopping, which can burst a monthly budget, or other kinds of things. When there's physical symptoms, when people feel tightness in their stomach or neck, more nervous or stressed than usual, you notice it because you're snapping at your kids or a good friend, or you're just, it's not like you're having trouble breathing like a heart attack, it's just you don't feel right. And it could be because you're coming down with something, and it also could be because your anxiety level is rising. And one way to deal with anxiety is to do something pleasurable, and that something pleasurable may jeopardize goal achievement. When you've had a bad day or a bad week, getting criticized at work, really troubling behavior of a child, and again, when that happens, that people can respond. And the other thing is just feeling overconfident. And this, I think, is especially the case. It's true for alcohol and drug work. I think it's also true with people who are trying to work a budget and to stay there, that sometime in that 3 to 6 month period in which you feel like I have things under control, right? There's no reason to really do all this time and go through all of this because I've got this. And then with that, the kind of mini decisions, I like this term, which are apparently irrelevant decisions that are not on course. So those little things that you do, perhaps with money, perhaps hanging out with people that have been a bad influence in the past. It ties into the feeling overconfident. But I think when people are able to identify and recognize triggers, then they're more likely to be able to say to themselves or to somebody else, oh, this is the sign, I need to be careful. You know, and this is a warning sign. And I think that's important. And I think that, for example, with maintaining financial stability, you know, we all know that developing and sticking to a budget's important. I really think in terms of case management for people that are moving toward permanent housing, that part of the case management needs to be smart money management skills and experience in having a budget and working a budget before they actually get to the housing, so that they've got experience doing it. But a budget tells us what we can afford, but it doesn't keep us from buying it. It's a useful tool, but it's still a tool that we need to use. And the more experience people have doing it and reacting when things don't go right, especially if it's in a transitional housing situation where it's a relatively safe space, I think the more likely they are to be able to stay in permanent housing. I think in terms of maintaining financial stability, not getting surprised by predictable recurring events. It's a time of year in which kids are going back to school, right? There are going to be expenses with that. If you have kids in school age, that's going to happen. My wife took a budgeting class some years ago, and one of the things the instructor said that stuck with her and stuck with me was the number of people that get surprised by Christmas every year, right? And so if people are getting money back from the earned income tax credit, and that check comes back in February or March, if they filed early, you know, and the idea of figuring out what are they going to need for back to school, what are they going to need for Christmas, what are they going to need for other things that are recurring, and to put those into a savings account that is hard to access. I've got a friend who would, when he would do that, is that he would go to a bank that's 30 miles away, put the money in a savings account, and it's something that he has no access to online. He has to actually go there to get the money. Savings, not checking. And so it's hard. And so he figured he needed to do that in order to keep that money safe. But I think just that issue about not getting surprised by things that one shouldn't get surprised at. And then I think, and this is as important as anything else, to develop the supports to maintain goal achievement. Is there a good enough friend that you can ask, help me stick to this? And you can accept negative feedback from this person. I was talking to a case manager who has worked with people experiencing homelessness and getting homelessness for a good while. And she says it's like, you know, it's much easier to get in shape if you've got a personal trainer, right? If you can afford a personal trainer. If someone is in a situation where there is supportive permanent housing and there is case management that goes on afterwards, that's great. Then the case manager may be able to do this, but often that's not the case. And so I think for clients asking that question, who do I know that you can ask that the person will be straight with me and I won't get upset or angry, or at least not very angry, if the person says, okay, I'm concerned. You did this and this last week, and that looks like something that could jeopardize where you are. Is there someone with whom you can form a buddy system? Is there somebody else who's in the same situation, someone else who just got housing, someone else who's really working to make sure that they and their family is not moving around the way they were, or not worried about money the way they were, that you can kind of use to support each other. Because we know for lots of things, getting in shape and weight loss are really good examples of that. Quitting smoking is, if you have a buddy system, somebody that is holding you accountable and you're holding them accountable, that you're more likely to succeed. Is there a support group, formal or informal, for others on the same path as you? You know, the buddy system is one person. If there's more than that, people who can get together and talk about how you're doing. In some cases, it can be vented. We all need people with whom we can talk about how tough it is, but also just to do that problem solving. And often other people will see options that you don't see, that the client may not see. Do you need to for the client, do you need to somewhat mend, burn bridges with family or friends? Because a lot of people that are experiencing homelessness have burned those bridges. You know, they've borrowed money that they never paid back. They've stayed at a friend's house too long, and finally the friend just had said, you really need to leave. If there were addiction issues that may have involved stealing money, all of those kinds of things. And then the question is, you know, can you mend those relationships? I was working with a guy who said, we haven't lived in the same state for a long time. My sister's in California, but we used to really, we used to talk once a week, and that was somebody that I could talk with, and about what was going on, and she could do the same thing, and it was really useful. And then I just stopped returning her calls a couple of years ago when things were going bad, and so he started calling again and just kind of building that as part of his support system. And so that's a good question. I think all of these are questions that, given the situation that someone's in, may be applicable. And then developing habits that will keep you on course. Now, the topic of developing habits is something else that one could spend a whole webinar on. And there's a couple of really excellent books on this. The one that I probably think is best is Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. And what Duhigg says is that every kind of habit, good habit or bad habit, is that because there's some cue, and then you do something after that, a routine, and then there's reward. And the advantage of habits in our daily life is that it means you don't have to think of things, right? I'm going to work in the morning, I get dressed, I go to my dresser and my wallet and the little book that I use to write notes so I don't forget too much, and pen and money and keys are all there. I put them in my pockets, and the good news is that I'm just not likely to forget the stuff I need to forget. And so that's a habit. One thing that I do in terms of trying to get exercise is that I pack the gym bag and I put it in the car in the front seat. If I'm thinking that I'm going to go swim some laps or spend some time on the exercise bike at the end of the day, and I get in the car and seeing that bag is the cue. And so the question is, how do people build that in? Because the idea of developing habits that will keep you on course. Simple cue, routine, reward loops that save effort. To change a habit, you substitute one routine for another and believe in the change. And it needs to be at least as easy and needs to have some reinforcement, either something that's tangible or the way you feel about it. And change can be achieved by focusing on keystone habits and then achieving small victories. So one of the things about financial self-sufficiency is that is opening bills. A social worker that I know that works with families on the issue of financial stability, and this is in a transitional housing situation. And when she said, okay, next time when we meet, we're gonna look at your bills. We're gonna go through that. And often she says that when she gets there, people open a drawer, and there are the bills, right, unopened. So one of the cue is something comes in the mail. The routine is when it comes in, I will open it that day and I'll decide what I want to do about it. Right? It's just to say that's the decision. And that's what I need to do every time. And it may be that I can't do anything about it. I may need to call somebody about it. It may mean that it's okay. This is not an issue, but I will not leave the bills unopened. And in doing this, I'm trading shame and anxiety for the opportunity to face reality. Because in some ways, and this is what I would tell people when I was working with folks that were homeless, if you do everything you can do that day, you try to call somebody, they're not there. With luck, they'll call you tomorrow, or you can reach them tomorrow, but you've done everything you can do. And so you can kind of get that monkey off your back. And in a way, that's the reinforcement for that kind of action. And it's essential to build in motivators. If people are working towards holding on to gains, holding on to goal achievement. One is to keep score of the benefits of the new habits. One of the difficulties with people as they're moving forward is the change is often really gradual. And so they don't recognize the impact of that. And so writing stuff down, having a friend or somebody else who helps you keep track of what's happened as a result of those. The second thing is to associate with individuals who will affirm and validate the changes and choices you are making. The difficulty of if you used to be, for a client who used to do a lot of partying, who used to do a lot of irresponsible spending, you get paid on Friday, and by the time you get home, there's not a lot of money left because you've already been to Walmart and cashed the check and gone out, and so there's less money. And if you're then hanging out with people who say, you'll be all right, we're just having a beer or two. If you're associating with people who like you, believe in the change, then that kind of validation will be a motivator for that. And then where this applies, pay attention to any changes in your children and other family members. And that again is keeping score. If your kid's anxiety level is going down because you're less stressed about, again, talking about the client being less stressed about money or holding on to housing, that's going to carry over to the kids, more likely than not. And then trying to pay attention to, for the 4-year-old, is it gone from an angry outburst every day to one every other day, or to only 2 or 3 days? That's really good news. And recognizing those, recognizing that things will get better is really a motivator. And then people need to figure out ways to reward yourself. If you're talking about money habits, part of it, budgets have to include the ways to reward yourself. Ideally, things that are free or inexpensive for options of having fun, but to make sure that that you are having fun, that you are enjoying life, because there's a certain amount of adrenaline that comes from being irresponsible. They call it shopping therapy because it can be, it can be kind of exciting to buy stuff, even if you don't really have the money to do it. And so how do you build in other routines, other activities, other kinds of things that make you feel good, but that aren't going to jeopardize the gains that you've made? And finally, and I love this quote from Dan Harris, your demons may have been ejected from the building, but they're out in the parking lot doing push-ups. Is that all of those temptations that all of us have had, as you think about it, think of the ones that apply to you, but that clients may have had in terms of things that would jeopardize their housing situation. the demons in the parking lot that says, I know you're not supposed to have a party, but why don't you invite 10 or 12 of your friends? Because after all, it's been a hard week. And why don't you invite them over and all of you just relax? And the noise from that could jeopardize the housing. So they're always there. The demons are always there, and they're waiting for you to open your door and to come back in. So I'm going to stop here because I've talked about a number of things. And so what I would really like, it says questions, but also if there are things that you've done or that you do that really fit with that would add on, that would be useful for other people to hear, I'd like to hear those too, because there's a lot of experience out there, and that's worth sharing. So comments, examples, and questions you have.
All right, we have a few coming in. I'm going to wait just a second to see if
Sure.
anything else comes. All right. So the first question is motivating individuals who are not ready to change. Kind of how can you go about increasing that motivation within them? We have a couple kind of similar to that.
Sure. So I think some of that is, and this is really the beauty of the stages of change model, is that when people are not ready to change, what really is the effort should be to help them to understand that maybe, perhaps, yeah, it might not be a bad idea for me to start thinking about doing something different. I think often when we think about motivating people to change, and motivate, as they say back in school, is a transitive verb, something that you have an impact. I don't think that generally works. I think what you're really trying to do is to plant the seeds. There are questions like, in what ways does this thing you're doing negatively affect you, negatively affect your kids, negatively affect others? And I think that's the kind of question that helps, sow the seeds of doubt about that. And, and if you were to make this change, what might be the advantages of that? And what might be the disadvantages of trying to do that? So you're not really trying to just sell something, but you're really trying to help people go on a path so that they would think, okay, maybe I want to do this and maybe I can do this. And that's the point when people really can start to make plans, and making plans before that often doesn't work. I mean, it's the history of wasted time in alcohol and drug centers, of people going in for 30-day treatment programs when they really didn't want to change, and stopping when the day they get discharged at a bar and then ended up in detox. So I hope that answers that question.
All right, next question is, a lot of their clients have zero support system besides themselves, the case manager. What are some ways that we could help connect them with someone, especially when they don't easily trust anyone, or they only rely on their close-knit family?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. And I think that this, that for example, in Pathway of Hope, that there is an effort to try to get people to think, is there a faith community that you would be involved in? What are the kinds of hobbies or interests that you've had in some cases in the past? How can you connect with people who have those shared interests? I think often support groups are really useful. In the community that I was in, couple of years ago, there was it was supposedly a class on on parenting for single parents, and it really turned out to be more of a support group and a really valuable support group because people were with others that they didn't know that were in similar situation in an ecumenical nonprofit that I'm associated with, Bethel House, in which we run workshops on smart money management, like 6-week sessions, and there are people who have come to those who have found who have formed friendships with other people that were taking the same series of workshops because they're in time. And so some of it is that people often not only don't have many supports, but they're just really isolated. And if you're working and have young kids, then there's not much other time left. In some places, there are family support centers that will allow parents to come, and they'll kind of be watching as the 2-year-olds play with each other. And often in the watching, people start to talk to each other because, parent with a 2-year-old has a lot in common with a parent with a 2-year-old.
All right. Next is just kind of a comment to share. I love the points of making sure you reward yourself for reaching goals and that you need to reassess what you're doing after you've reached the goals. Too many times there's a letdown once you get there and you end up sliding back into old habits.
Yeah. And I think it's that thing about just being aware, and that thing of keeping score. So, I mean, it's, and just kind of eternal vigilance. This is again that kind of weight example. I'm not overweight, but when I was in my 30s, I could eat anything in the world and would lose weight. And my wife was she still loved me, but she did not like me very much at times. I get on a scale every morning because I know that it's really easy to gain 5 pounds, and then it's really easy to gain another 5 pounds. And so it's just helping people to be paying attention to what all the signs and indicators and decisions are. So let me, Rachel, a little more, because I think I probably need to move on.
There's 2 more, but we can hold those for the end, I think.
Okay. Okay, so remember, with when people have reached goals, that slips and lapses are not uncommon. I mean, it really is, it's that case. When you think about the alcohol and drug literature, somebody who's quit smoking and they have a cigarette and they think, oh my God, I'm sunk, I'm back to a pack and a half. It's not necessarily so. People slip up and have a drink or a night of drinking. It's not necessarily so. And especially if bridges aren't burned, if you didn't lose a job, if you did not trash a relationship in there, it's just, we're humans. We mess up a lot. It's our nature. And so to help, not to excuse it or not for people to excuse it, but to say, this is okay, this is normal. When lapses occur, remember that, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, that's still forward progress. And that's the way the change process is, right? You go forward and then you may be good, then you may go back or maybe sideways, and it's all right. But to think about those as learning experiences, because I think that it's, having said that, about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, almost gives people permission. Well, I guess I can screw up every now and then, because it really should be thought of as learning experiences. What did you learn, and what will you do differently next time when you feel like your anxiety level is really high, or you're worried, or something's really got you down, and translating learning into action. And then you're really going back to, what plans can I use? What support do I need? what habits do I need to change or to put into place? So if a slip or lapse is seen as an indicator that, okay, so something, we need to tweak this, something needs to be done different, then it's essentially still a positive thing. And reject shaming yourself for your actions. Because my experience with people experiencing homelessness is there's just a whole lot of shame, for parents. How did I let my kids into this situation? I really messed up my life. And there's a whole lot of shame, and shame doesn't do anybody any good. I mean, shame saps energy. And so you're reframing it as, you did this, you learned something from it, you're going to do better next time. Resilience. And once goals are reached, after slips and unanticipated events, it's just that thing that life happens. Life happens, and life will continue happening. And one thing about many of the families we work with is that, not only is their life somewhat chaotic, but so is that of their family and friends, and sometimes often inadequate health insurance, and so health problems, and so those life happening and getting in the way may be a constant thing, and so people need to be preparing. And if it happens to you, then the question is, yeah, I know I just, I lost my job. My sister was really sick. There was nobody to take care of her. I asked for time off. I couldn't get time off, but I had to go to the Twin Cities and take care of her. Okay, life happens, and how soon can you get back on track? Thinking about how to move back towards where you want to be. And even when it's hard, trying to focus on the importance of maintaining this goal, that idea of keep your eyes on the prize. Income, shelter, housing, employment, okay? That in the midst of chaos and dealing with chaos, still to be thinking about, okay, how do I keep holding onto my housing, not getting into a hole financially? How do I keep that in play? So having said all of that, right, how to plan, what to do when things go wrong, there's a problem with the title of this webinar, Holding on to Goal Achievement. I realized it when I was a week or two into working on it, long after Rachel and I had agreed on the webinar and the topic. And the question is what's wrong with it? And my answer, you can think about it for a second in terms of anything you may think is wrong. But my answer is that people also need to be thinking about beyond just holding on to goal achievement, beyond just as maintaining housing, beyond just not being in trouble with creditors, because they're really important, but they're really kind of minimal in a way, achievements in life. It's both maintaining and how do you move forward beyond just having housing. It really goes from borrowing from improv theater, yes, I need to maintain that. And what else is possible? What could be possible? So this summer I was reading Nicole Mason's book, Born Bright, a young girl's journey from nothing to something in America. I'd heard her speak at a poverty conference last fall. And she had grown up in the not good areas of Los Angeles, and then the even hotter, not good areas a little farther out from Los Angeles. And she was bright, and she liked school, and she did well in school, And she was fortunate enough to find some teachers and people who believed in her, and that helped her get to Howard University and then beyond. I mean, she's a policy analyst now, and directs a part of a foundation in New York City. But one of the things that she said really in that journey is that she liked school, she did well in school. The idea of going to college seemed like a good thing to do, but it also almost seemed like one of those castles in the air, because she really did not see that as possible. I mean, she not as, okay, how possible is this? It just was really almost off her radar. And I think that for many people, getting by is what they're aiming for. And the idea for somebody who's got housing and who has built up their credit rating. And then the question is, okay, do you want to move toward home ownership? Is this something, because I think this might be possible for somebody who has who's built up or who's maintained a good employment history. Okay, what else would you like to do with a job? Perhaps something that's going to pay you a good bit more money, perhaps something that would pay you more money and you would enjoy doing, and really just moving beyond goal achievement and maintaining that, thinking really ahead. And that's why I think that the title is incomplete. So we've got a few minutes left, and so let me take a few questions and comments in the time. Rachel, why don't you give me the questions that were hanging while other people are writing, okay?
Yes. So first one is thoughts on if it's a good option for clients who don't have a positive support system to recruit members in the community to be a mentor.
I think it really works best when there is a mentor in the community that shares an interest, and perhaps an interest that is almost unrelated to the kind of moving ahead, okay? Because it's kind of awkward for a middle-class person to say, hi, I'm going to be your mentor or maybe your friend, and in which there aren't common points of reference. But I think when you identify that interest that somebody has, and you find somebody else who has that same interest, whose life is better. You know, it may be also same economic class, same race, maybe different, but I think when there's that commonality, that things like that are much more likely to click.
All right. Next question is, so many people are not patient enough to give goals a chance. They're seeking immediate results. Many also tie financial help to goals and some entitlements of I deserve or I'm owed. How can we help work within those challenges?
I think one of the things is, and let me just deal with the first one, because I think the thing of entitlement is too big to talk about in a couple of minutes we have left. I think for people who are not that patient, some of it is making sure you're setting really small goals, but they're real. And when people meet them, that you validate, you affirm that, and then say, okay, what's next? What's next? Because I think that some people may not have either the patience or the belief in themselves at this point in time to go forward. And I think often self-doubt gets masked by other things. But I think just trying to reach small goals, getting the feedback, which is the positive feedback, and using that to move forward is one approach.
All right. You ready for another one?
I am.
Okay. How do you work towards sufficiency when a family is restricted to Social Security? I'm assuming that's what they mean, dollars.
Say that again.
How do you work towards sufficiency when a family is restricted to Social Security dollars? I think their income is limited due to
to Social Security. Yeah, and And the difficulty of answering a really specific question without having enough information is hard. But one of the things that you do is you just look for just saying, okay, what are all the things that are resources? Are there any kinds of services that they could be accessing that they're not? Are there any ways to cut down on expenses that they're not? You know, are they, if they've got internet, are they using the AT&T, you know, $19 a month internet? Are there other things? Because I think with financial self-sufficiency, it's those two things about how do you, in many cases, how do you bring more money in? And then how do you restrict expenses to the things that are most needed? Are there ways to reduce the cost of utilities through some kind of informal or formal weatherization, et cetera? And that's really all that I know that would be helpful in that situation, because it's really tough when trying to make it just on Social Security.
I'm going to share my 2 cents, is that you have to reframe what sufficiency is, because it's not going to be the same for every individual. So what sufficiency looks like for one of our families or individuals who are on Social Security is going to look different than a family who's capable of, you know, increasing their income. So really reframing and what it looks like for that individual, I think, is a helpful tool and something we've used successfully with many of our families.
Very good.
All right, that's all the questions we have, unless someone wants to sneak one in real quick. While we wait, just so everyone is aware who maybe came in late, we will send a follow-up email and probably early next week that will have any attachments from Dr. Winship in the presentation, as well as a link to the recording and a certificate of attendance if you're interested in that. As you're exiting, a survey will pop up. If you'd please fill that out so we can make sure we get attendance, and then some feedback on today's session. So I think that's it for questions. Any final comments for us?
No, I think so. I like the questions that I've got, and I hope that it was useful.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Dr. Winship, for another wonderful presentation. So have a great rest of the day.